I too would like to acknowledge the land on which we are kind of meeting virtually tonight and pay my respects to our elders past and present. And I should also acknowledge that the title Cosy Home Clean Air came from Margaret O'Connor. Something she said to me one day and I thought that's a good title for it. So this is where most of us live. That's a pretty old photo, but it's greener and less dense, but it's also obviously a summertime photo. So why and what was all this about? So as Ian said, 2018, the Mayor invited a group of us to form this independent group, so independent from council, with a great cross-section of interests, and as a result there was obviously an inevitable lack of consensus. So this report is actually the majority view of the majority members, which means there's stuff in the report that some of the members are not happy about, and there is other things that didn't go into the report that some of us would rather it did. And that's the problem with democracy, that you can't all agree on everything, but what we hope is that the report as such is still the majority view, and that's what we came up with our recommendations. So the members were myself, who ended up as the chair. So Naviot, who's also on the ESAC committee, she's academic in psychology. Dave Carr, who most of you know from, at the time, SNELC. Peter Duckett was there in his capacity as a community member, although, as also most of you know, formerly from Duckett's Earth Moving, who used to sell firewood. John Grills from Barbecues Galore was basically representing the Australian Home Heating Association. David Hadley is a senior lecturer in agricultural economics, so from that perspective. Don Hine, behavioural and psychology and behavioural science. Jeff Kirkland from a chemistry and rural and sciences point of view, and Geeta from an epidemiological aspect. So it was quite a cross-section of people so that we could cover all bases. What we did decide was that this report would be very specific to wood smoke health and pollution issues. If we made it too big a broad an issue, then we wouldn't ever get anywhere. What the debate we needed to focus on was not whether there is or isn't a problem, but what we need to do about that problem. And also, really importantly, it wasn't about taking away the right for people to have their wood heaters, but it was more about ensuring the right to have clean air and a healthy environment. So Houston, we have a problem. Now that photo is actually from the bushfires, and with the bushfires, the purple air monitors were off the scale, and even with wood smoke, it's never as bad as that, but that was something we couldn't control. This wood smoke we can, and it's the result of really three issues. It's the temperature, because it gets very cold in Armidale. It's the topography, we're in a basin, so we get an inversion layer, and it's technical, it's the use of wood heaters, how they're operated, and the emissions they create. So a bit of background. Again, we didn't want to put a 6,000-page report about wood smoke because that information is readily available elsewhere. But basically, we acknowledge that wood heaters are a major source of PM 2.5. Now, these are the very fine particles that are causing the problems. It is acknowledged that the health effects of exposure above the acceptable limits do have health impacts. We needed to investigate how concerned the community are and what the perception from the community is, whether it's still a problem, whether it's their problem or not their problem. The barriers to change, which is always an issue. We looked at the idea of education versus incentives versus physical changes. And we also needed to take into account potential energy poverty. There's a lot of people who have free firewood and therefore it's free heating. And if we take that away, then how do they stay warm in winter? We looked at the history. So in 1994, a very, very proactive Armidale City Council, which was one of the greenest councils in Australia, rural councils, actually put forward an energy efficiency policy. And the aim was to achieve national recognition for New England as the leader in energy efficiency practice for rural Australia by the year 2000. And what came out of that at the time, and although it was focused on energy efficiency by default, it also addressed heating, was interest-free loans for insulation, interest-free loans for solar hot water systems, and there was also a system for a while going with CEDA, which was then the Energy Development Association for New South Wales, which has now been replaced by, I suppose, Department of Environment, to swap your wood heater for an electric heater. At the time, that meant you were just emitting the emissions down in the Hunter Valley rather than up here, but so be it. So there was rebates. Then over the years, there's been more and more education, and as the focus has come on to wood smoke, there's been stronger education processes. There's been smoke patrols, as in people going out at 6 o'clock in the morning and working out who were the big emitters, where's the smoke coming from. And there's also, the council has moisture meters that you can borrow to test your wood. So we also looked at other places. So Canberra and Launceston have both had wood heater replacement programs, and there has been some degree of success and some degree of failure. There's been other issues. For instance, in Launceston, it was financed through the Gas Association, and the idea was to replace your wood heater with a gas heater. The price of gas has now gone up, and a lot of those gas heaters have been pulled out, wood heaters have been put back in. So it didn't really achieve it. Christchurch was a different approach. They were keeping the wood heaters, but they were looking at better ways of using them and using better insulation, making sure the wood was a better quality. So the effectiveness for these things to work, they need to be consistent message over a long time at an affordable price with ongoing education. But that in turn then is challenged by high energy prices, because more often than not it's about switching to electricity or gas, and these are more expensive than if you've got free wood. So the boundaries and limitations for this report. First of all, we restricted it to Armidale City. So it's not the wood heater that's out in the bush. It's not wood heaters in Guyra or Uralla or anywhere else. The circle roughly equates to where the smoke tends to pool in the basin that is known as Armidale City. We agreed we would only look at housing. So we weren't looking at the Tas boiler that has coal fire and other commercial premises that use wood heaters. We were only looking at existing heaters initially, though the issue of new heaters certainly comes into the report. And the focus was on health and pollution. It wasn't, as I said, the right to have a heater. We weren't going to start addressing wood resources, biodiversity, because otherwise it was just getting too big an issue. So we tried to keep it very focused. Community awareness, there has been various surveys over the years, but we probably need to have an updated survey so that we can determine whether people still perceive it as a problem, whether people are prepared to react to it, do more, do something about it. Visual displays, while the extra, rest in peace, was going, we had this daily graph so people could actually see what was happening. And we've also had some public forums, certainly through SLA, but there'll need to be more public forums to get the message out to people about what's happening and what we can do about it. So, heating options. First of all, we looked at alternatives. So whether we still have that heater or whether we have different heaters. And taking into account also the effectiveness of existing heaters versus alternative heaters, and each of the different heaters, how effective they are. Their affordability, particularly in relation to fuel, as well as installation of the appliance. The cost impact, as in who's going to wear that cost if you've got to replace it with something else. And the emotional relationship. A lot of people won't give up their wood heaters and they like the ambience that a wood heater gives. The smart burn is something that's sort of a bit of a compromise. There is debate about whether it works or not, but anecdotal evidence from the professionals in town who clean chimneys say those that have the smart burns definitely have less creosote in their chimneys, which therefore implies wood is burning more efficiently. We looked at the different fuels. Obviously, wood heaters is firewood, and a lot of people have access to free wood. It's important that it's quality hardwood, and often it's unfortunately not. It needs to be moisture tested, and then even the stuff that's commercially purchased might be past the moisture testing test while it's out in the yard at Duckett's. If you take it home and it's not kept under storage, it can still get wet. And the cost of alternatives such as electricity. However, if you've got PVs, then that's negating that cost of electricity, which I'll go into further. And then we looked at other issues like pellet heaters and ethanol. And that was just some comparative costs, but it's very hard to look at those costs because there's so many variables. In terms of replacement options, there was an effectiveness of it might reduce emissions, but it might not be cost effective, or it might be cost effective but quite complicated to do. So this was just a summary of the relative merits of the in-service measures that was done by one organisation, but it shows you it's not a simple thing of let's just get rid of wood heaters. It's much, much more complicated than that. So the options we looked at, we only looked at heaters that equated to having a wood heater. So basically a thing that generates heat that warms your house. We didn't look at in-slab heating or hydronic heating and a whole lot of other forms. So the first obvious solution is to upgrade your existing wood heater. The pluses of that is obviously there's an emotional connection, easy to retrofit, you take one out, you put one in. They continue to leach heat even when they're not burning, and there is a perception of the value of doing that. The negatives are that no matter how wonderful and brilliant the heater, if it's badly operated, it will still have emissions. There's of course the issues of fuel storage, increasing fuel costs, and fuel suppliers would become scarcer. People could get lazy and the wood's wet, doesn't matter, or I'll just throw it in. It can be quite drying to the air, and of course there's a lag time in getting it fired up. So options for replacement, and the most common and most promoted option of course is reverse cycle air conditioners. They do of course provide absolute instant heat, very controllable for timing and thermostats. They can, one of the benefits are that if you've got PVs on your roof, and Armidale has an above average percentage of PVs on roofs, you can basically preheat your house. So during the day it's running, it's not costing you anything, and you come home to a warm house. So you haven't had to pull any power off the grid during the day. It has a very high coefficient performance for that reason, and has the added benefit that you can use it for cooling in summer. That though then becomes potential laziness, where people turn it on in summer when they could be doing other things. They can be drying, they can be noisy. If you don't have PVs, it can be quite expensive to run, and they're only heating or cooling while they're on. Once you turn them off, they're not doing anything. Convection heaters, again, instant heat, controllable thermostats, timers, preheat with solar, and very good for heating large areas, which is what wood fires, and there are people who claim that a wood fire is the only way you can heat a whole house. That is also debatable, but convection heaters, again, because they're pumping hot air around the house, will do the same thing. Again, they can be expensive if you don't have PVs. They're active only. Once you turn them off, they cool down. They're not as efficient as a reverse cycle, and they don't work as well with high ceilings because they're pushing the heat upwards. Radiant heaters, so they're the little things that get very hot, very efficient for small areas and short periods. But again, advantages, there is no moving air, so there's no drying and no noise. Again, preheat with solar during the day, and the heat is retained at the source, as in it stays hot, which is also a negative, but it does stay hot where it is. But again, there is that lag time to get the heat into the room because you're not moving the air, and they can be expensive if you haven't got PVs. Heat banks. So this is where you have very, very dense bricks with an electric element running through them. Again, day use with solar, as with all the others, but the difference is with the others that even when it's turned off, it will continue to leach heat. And the option for these is that you can switch to off-grid, options for on-grid and off-peak if their solar doesn't do enough. And in terms of price competitive, it's on par with buying a gas heater. Again, there is the initial lag time, but that's only once when you turn it on at the beginning of winter, and limited areas. For very large houses, you may need 2 or 3. One may not be enough. Gas heating, which has been popular in the past. Again, instant heat, controllable. It can be cost effective compared to electricity. Very easy to do whole house ducting and very efficient for quick heating. However, the cost of gas is going up, and the cost of availability of gas, and there are of course environmental issues with gas. It is a fossil fuel. The cost of purchasing and installing the gas heater, and that does need infrastructure changes, and there are major health issues if it's hot fluid and condensation issues. Pellet heaters, which are very popular overseas. Instant, controllable, high efficiency, low emissions. The fuel's made from waste products, and unlike the others, they are cool to touch, which kind of negates the benefit of it leaching heat. But the problem is, unless we had 1,000 people decide to buy them in Armidale, the availability of the pellets as well as the appliances themselves can be quite expensive. Bulk storage is needed for the pellets, and they do use electricity to run fans and elements. Ethanol spirit heaters, which have become very trendy. It's a biodegradable combustion. It's instant, very, very high efficiency, and no infrastructure. You don't need fluing, but they're not really generating a lot of hot. They're more for a lot of heat. And they're more for effect than trying to heat up a whole house. There's operational issues. Once the ethanol runs out, you've actually got to let the whole thing cool down before you can top it up. Condensation issues, as with gas, and indoor air issues, and the fuel and the appliance can be quite pricey, as there's also the issue of storing the ethanol. So then we looked at the actual housing stock. So there's not a lot of point putting a lot of heat into a house if it's just going to go straight out the building. So first of all, insulation, which is the no-brainer. There's a lot of houses here you can put the most fantastic heating in, but if the house isn't insulated, you're just going to lose it all. And there is plenty of research on the benefits of insulation, how it improves the energy savings on both heating and cooling. And glazing, double glazing now is very much on par and off the shelf. It used to be, 3 times the price of standard glazing, and it's quite easy to retrofit existing glazing, particularly with timber windows, which is most of your old weatherboards. But again, the improvement, whether you're adding curtains, pelmets, going up to double glazing, or putting the whole lot together as a package. And then there's the low-hanging fruit, putting in decent curtains, making pelmets, putting a sausage against the door, all those little things that add up to keeping the heat inside the house. So what we came up was that it's all very good to have heater rebates, but maybe they should be tied to housing upgrades. That, yes, you might get a rebate to replace your heater, but only if you do a series of things to improve your house, which I'll go through later. We also discussed the issue of rentals and landlords. There's not a lot of incentive for landlords to do it, and people who are renting can't actually do some of that stuff. So how do we address that? Education and behaviour. So the incentive, is the incentive for the comfort, or is it the cost, or is it the health, or is it sticking to the rules? So again, people have different concerns for different issues. So for retaining wood heaters, there needs to be the quality of the wood is really important, as well as the storage, and heater maintenance and operation so that they work efficiently. So getting your chimneys cleaned, getting the heaters cleaned, making sure that there's no cracks or breaks in them. But also reducing your heating needs, which comes down as well as to infrastructure, the freebies, which is the house operation. There's no point in having great curtains if you don't close them. And behaviour. I'm not expecting to walk around in a t-shirt and shorts in the middle of winter. Armidale has monitoring. We've got evidence and real-time data for many, many years. We had the dust tracker. We now have all the purple air monitors, and you can go onto the SLA website and click on this. And as I said, that was over the top during the bushfires, which was significantly worse than it ever gets with wood smoke. But that said, anything that's not green is a problem. And people seeing that, it becomes more of an incentive for action when they can actually see results and see that something is happening. So there's legislation. There are standards for heaters. There's the actual installation of them, how far the chimney must be from the roof, how far the heater's got to be from the wall. But there's also emission limits, and the current emission limits, they're getting tighter and tighter. And that's for all new wood heaters, 2.5 grams. But the problem is that 90% of the heaters in Armidale are old heaters, and they're not brand new, and so they're not necessarily compliant. So Armidale Regional Council does have policies. You have to put in a Section 68 application if you want to put a wood heater in. They don't get that many applications, so it is suspected that many heaters go in without permission. But again, that's still only addressing the new heaters. It doesn't address all the heaters that are here. The policy for council currently is to give advice. If people are continually producing excess smoke, they do get warnings and ultimately they get fined, but I think there's been 2 fines in 10 years. It's not something that really gets enforced. So our recommendations, there was a lot of things that we came up with, and the decision was that what we really do need to do is look at it as a package. We need to look at the heater, whether that's upgraded or replaced, the house that the heater sits in and the condition of that house, and then education, how to operate the house, how to operate the heater, and how to live and more productively in terms of staying warm and cool. But in reality, the education needs to come first. So the education followed by incentives and ultimately enforcement. So our recommendations were, in terms of education behaviour, we need to revisit the community survey, find out what the level of community awareness is and what the level of community concern is, run some more forums and workshops based on both heater operation as well as household behaviour. Council has access to how-to videos and providing more links to the AHAA videos, the SLA videos. Incentives in New Zealand, they had wood store competitions because so having competitions designing really good wood stores meant that people were at least building decent wood stores, so it wasn't all sitting out in the rain. Rerunning our curtain and pelmet making workshops and how-tos for house improvements. And then in terms of replacement, so if you were to get a rebated package for a new appliance, and again, optional fuel sources, you then would have to, that would be conditional to having ceiling insulation. If you've already got ceiling insulation, if applicable, adding floor insulation. If you've already got floor insulation, if applicable, adding wall insulation. If applicable, if you've already got that double glaze. So in this order, that you have to have at least some of that put in so that the heat's not just going straight out the window. And then other issues, and all this is detailed in the report. So incentives for landlords, which is the state government did have one some years ago for insulation. So again, if we could do the same for this, and whether rather than a rebate, it may be a reduction on rates. Smoke patrol funding, we've had smoke patrol officers in the past. So getting the funding for them to continue doing that, more educational material and signage. So this is actually in India, but it's also something very common in Germany. One suggestion was down on the corner of the service where they have their big LED sign, or somewhere in the mall, that if people see this in their face, they can see the levels going up and down, they're more likely to do something about it because it becomes an awareness issue. So the timing then was, in the short term, get the survey up and running, find out what's happening, what's perception of what's happening, get an education program up and running, start with community consultations with the council and the forums, develop some strategies and directions, and apply for funding. And this is where it's a catch-22, because we need someone at council to be applying for the funding, and they need to be paid to be doing that, and set up the future actions. Medium term would be to implement the packages once we get the funding, and that's basically a packaged rebate system. Ongoing educational programs for long-term planning, so that when the long-term rules and regs come in, the public is ready for it. And the example of that is back in the 90s, when Armidale was the first council in Australia to introduce compulsory insulation. When it was eventually brought in, there was absolutely no flack from builders, because there'd been a very comprehensive education program before that for the value of doing it, how to do it. And so by having that pre-education for long-term planning, when you bring plans, there's a lot less flack. And ongoing monitoring, of course, so that we've got the evidence. And then the long-term was regulations for new housing. So ideally, and this is where the committee did not agree, obviously, that no new houses, no wood fires would be allowed in new houses, and then ultimately in X years' time that would no longer be allowed in renovations, and then ultimately possibly total removal. But it is about finding that balance, but you know, where the balance with issues of energy poverty versus you know, staying warm and affordability and fuel. So there's a whole lot of issues involved. And that's basically the gist of the report. It is available. Ian, have we got it up on the SLA website? We can do that.
I'm not sure.
I can send you the link.
We can do that. Yeah,
yeah.
I'll add probably this video plus that report, we can add it to the story.
Yeah, so it is a public document now. What the next process was that our recommendation basically was that it go to the sustainability officer, and then council would then start chasing funding and doing these actions. However, what has happened as instead of that happening, it's gone to ESAC, which is the Environmental Sustainability Advisory Committee, to set up a working group. And my concern is that it's still a volunteer working group. We're still not going, we're just reinventing the wheel rather than going to the next step. All that, of course, is on hold with our council now being on hold. So where it goes to next, I have no idea. Questions?
Yeah, what I was going to do is, if it's okay with everybody, I was just going to elevate everyone to panelist, and then we can see everybody and talk. Is that okay? Let me know in the chat whether you don't want that to happen.
Well, we can just see what the questions, people can write questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we can just answer them.
Yeah. We'll just see if this works.
Yep.
I think anybody can, let me know as a panelist. Okay, here we go. There we go, Patsy. I'm just about to, just people can start talking when they want to talk. Go for it. There's only 11 of us, so.
I thought it was 13. There's 13 on the chat. There's 20.
That's with 24. Us.
Okay. I gotcha. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, kind of. It seems like when were the monitors put in, Dorothy?
Which ones, the purple air or the dust track, or which? We've had monitoring since about 1996, really, almost continuous.
The dust track's not there anymore.
No, but we have compared the dust track with the purple air, so we know that because we know that we can get exactly the same readings out of the dust track as we are from the purple air and from the official air quality monitors.
Yeah.
The purple air now are not being maintained, so half of them have gone wonky, and unless you happen to know how to read the charts, you won't know which ones are wonky and which ones aren't, because there's no effort being put into maintaining them, which is a problem, just like all the other problems we've got.
Yeah, what was I going to say? It got better at some point, didn't it? It was really, really bad, and then there was the measures were taken, and that improved things a bit. But it hasn't gone better again. It was a step, and then it's sort of at that level now.
So yeah, well, the big improvement was to 1999 because council offered fairly generous rebates, and they had a good education program. And that was when things started working well. And then, unfortunately, the wood heating industry got involved, and they started telling people that new heaters were actually clean and environmentally friendly. So that was when it really started to go downhill, and it hasn't really seen much improvement since then. But it's slightly better than it was, but not much.
Dorothy, were you saying that the current monitors are not working, so that when we look up what the wood smoke levels are, it's not accurate at the present?
Well, I'm saying that some of them aren't working, and I'm saying that not the ones that, and the ones that are owned by council aren't being checked or managed or anything done with them. So if they're faulty, nothing happens to them.
But so if we look at that map, there's no way of knowing what the reading actually is.
So the best way of looking at them is to compare the A and B channels. And if there's any difference between the A and B channels, then the monitor needs maintenance. But then council doesn't have the expertise to do that.
Oh.
Okay.
And so we can't know when we look when we look up, say, what the smoke in our region is,
you
we
can.
can't.
Well, you can after you can see A and B in that's publicly available. So if there's some, I'd have to. We could bring it up on the screen if you want.
Yeah, I'm doing that. Oops.
Yeah, I'll let you do it. I can do it as well. Was there any other questions for Mahalath?
Well, if nobody else wants to ask one, I'll ask one, and that is that we've eventually decided to move out of town because the health impacts of wood smoke, even on the hills, are just too detrimental. And I'm just wondering what Mahalath thinks of that. Is the best thing for anybody who's sensitive to wood smoke just to move out of town because there's no hope of doing anything about it in the near future?
I'm not in a position to make that recommendation one way or another. That's a personal decision for people. There's the current monitor, by the way.
It's an environmental decision as well if people have to move out of town and spend more on transport and other things.
Well, and ultimately, council risk, isn't it?
Well, only if people think it's a risk. We do a lot of things for sensitive people, like, for example, people who are sensitive to peanuts. They have a right to go to school where they don't have peanuts. But there's absolutely nowhere in Armidale you can live where if you're sensitive to wood smoke. And that's why we've had, maybe 20 or 30 people moving out of town.
No comment.
Yeah.
No, it's sort of a variant of that in a way. I have a real problem here where I live, just across the road and down a little bit and up the road and across the road. There are wood heaters that are continually polluting, and I truly know that in both those cases, the people involved are doing it tough. They're in rented accommodation. The last thing I want is for them to be harassed and to be fined because what can they do about it?
Maybe you could knock on their door and just say, look, do you know how to use your heater properly?
Yeah, I've done this. But in both cases, they're people who are really struggling. And the wood's just what they can sort of scrounge. It's not cured properly, and the heaters are not being kept properly because it's rented accommodation. It's a real dilemma, I think. And it often is, I suspect, rented places. I don't know. But I leave town too during winter time as much as I can. I go to Ipswich, ironically, cold town.
You're not allowed to at the moment.
No, can't at the moment. Stuck here.
I don't know. Are you going?
I just, Mike, was wondering about a readout that shows changes over the years. I wasn't quite sure how to find that on the Purple Air site or whether it exists.
I've got one for the past since 2010 that's readily available on the air quality website.
Yeah, the EPA website.
And it will be published sooner. And there are stuff before that, but that was essentially when that was just the easiest data to assemble.
Somebody talked about 8 premises. Are they the ones that Renew has already engaged with, or how many vacant shops are there in the mall? And are we talking about the East Mall as well, or just the Central Mall?
Oh, gee, we've got cross.
That's the Renew website. That's the other forum. How did that happen?
Sorry, so
That's Bar.
our household is watching.
I was on the other forum.
Oh, split screen. Okay.
No, 2 different.
Wood heaters in those buildings.
Yep.
It's actually, I'm looking at these numbers tonight, and it's not.
They're very high.
It's only the start.
Well, and they're getting higher each night, and some of them are quite are, you know, in the unhealthy for everyone region already.
Yep.
Or are they misreporting, or what's?
I suspect the one that says 31 is one of the bunged ones.
One that says 31, that's ours, isn't it? I'm confident that ours is working.
Oh, okay, this one's, yeah.
That's an indoor one. That's
Oh, right, okay. Okay, so that's not the correct. Some of them do seem a long way out.
Yeah, well, no, that's an indoor one because it's a black circle around it. So if you go to the widget, so that might mean that whoever lives there has got a wood heater inside his house or is burning the toast. There's a little option in the left-hand corner to show only the outdoor ones.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And that can help.
Maybe this will take me to the site.
Yeah.
Oh.
But while you're talking about that, can I suggest another thing? And this is that, you know, we've got now getting lots and lots of money for home renovations of over $150,000, and that if we could lobby the government and say it'd be much more sensible to allow sensible things like, you know, I mean, upgrading heating instead for landlords and for homeowners, that would be a much better way to stimulate the economy in this region. If we could get a united front on that, or get the air quality group, if it's ever set up, to do something about it.
Well, the government would claim that that doesn't take enough labor.
Well, if there's 10 times as many people taking up the option, it would take just as much labor.
No, if you buy a new heater that's manufactured overseas, it doesn't stimulate our economy in that way.
But yeah.
But I mean, I agree with you that it's what they're proposing is stupid, and that there should be small grants for small appropriate renovation. But I'm not sure that heaters is the answer.
Well, half the cost is installation in, say, something like reverse cycle. So you would certainly have a lot of local employment.
Yep. Yeah, and that would
totally. It's the stimulus thing is more about longer term in terms of you're on a building site for more than 5 minutes if you're actually doing that stuff. But you know, yeah, it's the world.
Yeah.
A wonderful thing, isn't it, to play with?
Yeah, look at that. That's amazing.
It is.
Okay. So this is a bit better. We can get some.
So in terms of the report, I mean, we need council to now take the next steps, and obviously nothing is going to happen for a few months, I assume. But we need, Dorothy, do we have a new sustainability officer?
No.
Yes.
Oh.
Is that McLeod? What's her name? What is their name?
I can't remember.
Is it Mandy McLeod?
I'm not sure. I'll try and find out for you.
Great.
Because that's the person who should then be taking this and driving it.
Mm-hmm.
Because this report was intended to be recommendations for council to move forward with strategies.
And they went to council, and the recommendations were basically we can't afford to do anything.
But part of the recommendation was to pursue funding.
Yeah. And the question is whether the sustainability officer or whether it would be helpful to have something like the air quality group who can, you know, who would be able to do a much better job of pursuing funding and helping council with this issue.
Well, I disagree, because those groups are all volunteers. We need somebody who's being paid to sit down and chase all this funding and put it all together. It's not the job of volunteers. Otherwise, we just keep going. We just keep extending it. We're not actually ever going to move forward.
Is that why you think we've had all these grants that haven't ultimately changed the conditions here?
Such as? How do you
Well,
mean?
there have been lots of wood smoke grants over the last 10 years at least, where ANU has done, UNE has done a lot of research into methods for changing people's minds and none of that has made any significant difference in the wood smoke locally. So I'm wondering what kinds of grants would make a difference.
Well, it was more about pursuing funding for rebates and those programs, I think. And
okay, that's what I'm asking. Yes.
Yeah, for physical spending of money.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because your report seems to suggest heavy emphasis on education.
Well, it's the education and the rebate packages.
Okay.
But, the education certainly worked in Christchurch with their program, and a lot of that was about changes in behaviour.
Wasn't it also about changing the regulations for the wood fires themselves, for the stoves themselves?
Yeah, but they didn't pull them all out. They still have them. So
I thought there was a huge replacement. Dorothy would know this, I don't, but my understanding was that
but they changed most of them. They didn't allow any new ones.
But also in Launceston, a lot of them have been replaced, as in put back in. Because they were replaced with gas. And again, because none of the other programs addressed the house. So without, making sure that the house stayed warmer, you still need the same amount of heating. So that's why we talked about having this package. And that's why you need to get funding to be able to provide the rebates to make it happen. And lobbying legislation as well.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't be too many wood fires in the middle of the Melbourne CBD, I would have thought.
It's probably the worst there I've found is Melbourne, but no, the worst there is definitely Armidale.
Yeah. But it is topography as well too. And Launceston,
temperature and
Launceston has a similar climate and a similar topography, as in it's in a bowl.
The thing about, I couldn't get any purple air response from Launceston.
They may not have any. Maybe they haven't got any down there. But in the report, there are links in the report to all these other reports, so all the resources. And there's been a heap of documentation from Launceston, and a lot of that was behaviour related in the end. But, it was about the long-term continuing high impact message. You're not going to get instant changes.
No, but it was pretty quick where they got rid of, they had grants to replace about maybe 1,000 or 2,000 heaters, and then they had some very good health messages, and those very good health messages resulted in homeowners actually replacing their wood heaters entirely at their own expense. So the messaging there worked because they started to understand the health impacts. And that's what we haven't had here. There's probably 90% of people in Armidale have just no idea what is happening to their health. They think if you get a heart attack or a stroke or a really bad cold in winter, it's just because it's winter. They don't understand the impact of the health effects. And that was one health professional sort of put in a submission to one of the earlier consultations, and where he had 2 kids, and both of them every winter had terrible respiratory conditions all winter because he was living down in Allingham Street. And then he moved up to the avenue above the wood smoke level. And as soon as he moved up there, the 2 kids had perfect health all winter. And people just don't understand that. And if they did understand that, I think people would start taking this problem seriously. So that's my real question to people who are here. What sort of health effects are you prepared to put up with for having wood heaters? Because if we don't really focus on that, then we'll never get the community on board unless they understand what it's doing to your health, which is where Launceston really shone compared with other places. They had some really good TV adverts showing the health impacts. And that's why people voluntarily change their heating.
Yeah. They seem to either have some money. Some people are just silly. They just want wood heaters. I don't know if you can, if they really, they still don't understand the implications. Maybe there needs to be more education done.
Can I make a suggestion for SLA? In that wood smoke has been going around with various iterations of our council for many, many years without seemingly much success. My suggestion is that SLA actually submits this report direct to the new administrator, and hopefully that we can get some action that way, in that we can't seem to get any action from anything else. So while we've got a change of approach, we might have someone new that we can have direct influence with. That's just a suggestion that SLA maybe go ahead and take that initiative. That's all.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. Well, I would suggest we actually go ahead and set up the air quality working group that was agreed by council on the 13th of March. That was when council agreed that this air quality working group should be set up, and obviously nothing's happened since then.
But that's all. You don't have the power to do that at the moment. I mean, that's all council stuff. And that's all in suspension. Yeah.
Well, the council resolution has to be implemented. It was agreed. It's on the books now as something that council has to do. So it has the power. It's already set up. It's already done.
Mm-hmm. You mean the administrator now?
Pardon?
You mean the administrator has the power now?
No, the administrator, unless the administrator changes his mind and says, I don't want to do that, then it has to be done. So it doesn't have the power, it's a requirement, because it's been agreed by council. Just like, say, spending on the mall or spending on anything else. This is being agreed that council will do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be good if we could get the community on board and find the right people who are interested in this issue. Because obviously, if people aren't interested in the issue, then it won't be progressed. But just as the climate emergency working group, there's a lot of very interested people with lots of different skills. There's no reason why this couldn't happen exactly the same way.
Well, isn't that what just happened? Didn't you have a very diverse group with a lot of people with very good skills working on this report?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically being done.
But there's no lobbying. I mean, the idea of the group would be that it would be able to do the lobbying as well and make recommendations and say, do this now, do that next. And it would therefore demonstrate to council that this is a way forward rather than having a report that sits on the shelf.
But the report has those recommendations that this is the way forward and this is what needs to be done in this order and in this time frame. So that stuff's been done. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to get in there and do it. And that needs
some of it was done months ago. I mean, like for example, I've been working for the past 6 months on a health impact study with New South Wales Health. So some of it's been done. Other things, other recommendations like having a purple air monitoring gyro was done in 2018. So some of the things already have been done. And the question is then, what do we do next? And that really depends on how much money council has got to do it. And remember that we're now talking about a court action that might be costing $250,000, $500,000. So that's an awful lot of money coming out of council's budget. So they'll be a little bit harder to get things done because of that. And some of the opportunities have also been lost, like, for example, some of the bushfire stimulus money and some of the recovery from the drought. That would have been good money that, had there been a group that was advocating for air quality, we might have got some more money into insulation and all the other things. But without that group, it never happened.
So coming back to the report,
it's just looking around, and people I've been playing in front of people, but we're worst in Australia, and I can't see anything worse in New Zealand or places like Korea. yeah, it's really,
Somewhere
it's concerning.
Well, it's warmer up there now in Korea.
Yeah, summertime.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, but back to Australia though. We're hitting. It'd be great if it was a cricket score, but it's not, is it? It's kind of it's an unhealthy score, isn't it? Something does need to happen. I do agree with Dorothy, and it's been the connection between health and this number that we're getting from these things, the correlation needs to be made clearer, I guess.
Well, I know that in the summer when we got to the level that we're at tonight, lots of people were staying inside because they were frightened to go out and exercise. And yet tonight we have that same level. So
it's far worse
this is bushfire.
I think that we now have a different understanding.
No, bushfires was up around the 800-900s. It's much worse.
Yes, but there were many days when it was around 150 to 200.
Yeah.
And that's what it is now. And people didn't want to go outside because we were told not to exercise or go out.
Yeah.
If it was over 100.
Got to 2,500.
Yeah, it was off the scale.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, of course it was off the scale some days, but my point is people became more sensitive to it during this summer than I think they had been before. So it's something that one could work with.
It's also good if you live on the two hills, by the looks of it. But Sudan's not looking too good here. But yeah, up here on the top here, yeah, it's obviously for people who want to live in the old part of town, and poorer people too.
So was there any other questions from the report?
No, I'd just like to thank you. I thought you presented it very, very clearly and beautifully.
Thank you.
I agree.
Yeah, thanks, Mahalath. That was good.
We're coming up to 8. Oh, yep, go.
I just wanted to ask Dorothy where that data is. You said it's on the EPA site. What's it under?
The air quality.
Just the long-term graphs that show it, you know, for over a period of years, how it's changing in Armidale. Is that what you said?
It's not on the EPA website. It's data that I've collected from the dust track, because it was only the dust track that was working for from roughly 1999. They've had either the nephelometer, the EPA nephelometer was moved to the council chambers, and then the dust track, which is on the roof of the council chambers. So those are that's the only long-term series.
So where's it available, Dorothy?
Well, it might be available on the AAQG website. I think part of it is. I'm not sure if I've bothered to put it up there. It's certainly there, and I've certainly shown it to several people in lots of times. But the question is whether it's still there or I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just had difficulty
I'll have a look.
finding that. Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe you could send it out, Dorothy.
Yeah, well, I can if